Welcome to Philosophy and Literature for Sleep, where ancient wisdom meets gentle rest. Tonight, we're settling in with one of history's most profound teachers, a man who found freedom in the most unlikely place. His name was Epictetus, and his meditations on life, choice, and inner peace have been quietly guiding souls toward tranquility for nearly 2,000 years. As always, you don't need to remember everything you hear tonight. You don't need to take notes or stay alert. Just let these timeless thoughts wash over you like a warm evening breeze. If you find yourself drifting off, that's exactly what we're here for. And if the ideas keep you awake a little longer, well, at least you'll be pondering some of the most beautiful insights ever recorded about what it means to be human. Before we begin our gentle journey through the mind of this remarkable philosopher, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Are you tucked into bed in London at 11:30, or perhaps curled up on a couch in Toronto as the snow falls outside your window? Let me know in the comments. There's something wonderfully comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across the world, sharing these quiet moments of reflection. Now, settle in. Get comfortable. Pull that blanket a little closer. Tonight's exploration is for relaxation and contemplation only, not as a substitute for professional guidance or medical advice. Ready? Let's step back in time and discover what a former slave can teach us about true freedom. Who was Epictetus? Picture, if you will, a man born into bondage in ancient Rome, somewhere around the year 50. His very name meant acquired one, marking him as property from birth. Yet this man, who began life with nothing, would become one of the most influential philosophers in human history. There's something almost poetic about it, isn't there? That wisdom can bloom in the most unlikely soil. We know little about his early years, but we know he was owned by Epictetus, a wealthy freedman who served in the court of Emperor Nero. It was there, in the corridors of power and excess, that young Epictetus first encountered the teachings of Stoic philosophy. Perhaps it was the contrast between the chaos around him and the calm principles he was learning that made these ideas take root so deeply in his mind. The Stoics believed in something beautiful and simple. They taught that while we cannot control what happens to us, we can always control how we respond. For a slave, this wasn't just philosophy. It was survival. It was hope. It was the difference between despair and dignity. Legend tells us that Epictetus was lame in one leg, though whether from birth, accident, or cruelty, we cannot say. Some stories claim his master broke his leg in anger, and when Epictetus calmly warned that continued pressure would snap the bone, his prediction proved correct. If true, his response was simply to observe that he had told his master what would happen. No rage, no bitterness, just acceptance of what was beyond his control. Whether this story is fact or legend matters less than what it reveals about the man's character. Here was someone who understood, perhaps better than anyone, the difference between what we can change and what we cannot. This distinction would become the cornerstone of all his teaching. Eventually, Epictetus gained his freedom. Some say it was a gift upon his master's death, others that he was released during his lifetime. Either way, he found himself free in a world where former slaves often struggled to find their place. But Epictetus had found his calling. He opened a school of philosophy in Rome, teaching the very principles that had sustained him through bondage. When Emperor Domitian banished all philosophers from Rome around the year 89, Epictetus simply moved his school to Epirus, Greece, to a small town called Nicopolis. There, on the shores of the Mediterranean, he continued teaching until his death around 135. Students traveled from across the empire to hear him speak, drawn by his reputation for practical wisdom delivered with gentle authority. What's remarkable about Epictetus is that he never wrote anything down. Like Socrates before him, he believed wisdom was best transmitted through conversation, through the living exchange of ideas between teacher and student. Everything we know of his thoughts comes from the careful notes taken by his student Arian, who preserved both formal discourses and informal conversations in what we now call the Discourses and the Enchiridion, or Handbook. These texts reveal a teacher who was both profound and practical, someone who understood that philosophy wasn't meant to be an intellectual exercise but a way of living. His voice, even filtered through his students' writing, feels immediate and personal. He speaks not from ivory towers but from experience, from a life that had tested every principle he taught. The heart of Epictetus's philosophy rests on a single, elegant idea that he returned to again and again. Some things are within our power, and some things are not. This sounds almost absurdly simple, doesn't it? Yet spend a moment considering how much of your daily stress comes from trying to control things that are ultimately beyond your reach. According to Epictetus, what lies within our power is remarkably small, but infinitely important. We control our judgments, our desires, our responses, and our choices. That's it. Everything else, the entire external world, from the weather to other people's actions, to our own health and circumstances, lies outside our direct control. This isn't a philosophy of passive resignation. It's quite the opposite. It's about focusing all our energy and attention on the one domain where we have absolute sovereignty, our own minds and choices. When we truly understand this distinction, Epictetus taught, we become unshakable, not because nothing bad can happen to us, but because we recognize that our peace of mind doesn't depend on external circumstances. Imagine how liberating this realization must have been for someone who had spent years as another person's property. While his body could be controlled, bought, and sold, his thoughts, judgments, and inner responses remained his own. No master, no emperor, no circumstance could touch that inner citadel of the mind. But Epictetus didn't present this as a grim fortress mentality. Instead, he saw it as the foundation of genuine happiness and freedom. When we stop trying to control the uncontrollable, we free ourselves to put all our energy into what actually matters, becoming the kind of person we want to be. He often used the metaphor of an archer to illustrate this point. A skilled archer focuses completely on their stance, their breathing, their aim, and their release. These are the things within their control. They cannot control the wind that might shift their arrow or the movement of the target. If they become anxious about these external factors, they'll likely miss their mark. But if they focus solely on executing their technique perfectly, they give themselves the best possible chance of success while maintaining their peace of mind, regardless of the outcome. This principle extends to every area of life. We cannot control whether others love us, but we can control how lovingly we treat them. We cannot control whether we get sick, but we can control how we care for our health and how we respond to illness if it comes. We cannot control whether we succeed in our endeavors, but we can control how much effort we put forth and how gracefully we handle whatever results follow. Epictetus taught that most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our judgments about what happens to us. A rainstorm is just water falling from the sky. It becomes a problem only when we label it as inconvenient or disappointing. A criticism from another person is just words and sounds. It becomes hurtful only when we accept it as true or important. This doesn't mean we should become emotionally numb or pretend that difficult things don't affect us. Rather, it means we should examine our automatic reactions and ask ourselves whether they're serving us. Are we adding unnecessary suffering to unavoidable pain? Are we making situations worse by our judgments about them? Consider how often we torture ourselves with thoughts like, "This shouldn't be happening," or "If only things were different." These thoughts change nothing about our circumstances, but they poison our ability to respond wisely to whatever we're actually facing. Epictetus suggested we replace such thinking with acceptance of what is, combined with thoughtful action toward what could be. He had a particular talent for finding vivid, everyday examples to illustrate these abstract concepts. If you're at a banquet, he might say, and a dish is passed around the table, you don't grab desperately at it or complain if it doesn't come to you. You wait your turn, take what's offered gracefully, and enjoy what you receive without demanding more. This is how we should approach all of life's offerings, from opportunities to relationships to material possessions. The philosopher also understood that this way of thinking required constant practice. He compared it to athletic training, noting that just as we must exercise our bodies regularly to maintain physical strength, we must exercise our minds daily to maintain philosophical strength. Each challenge, each disappointment, each moment of irritation becomes an opportunity to practice applying these principles. When someone insults you, Epictetus might say, they're giving you a chance to practice not letting external opinions disturb your inner peace. When you face a setback, it's an opportunity to practice accepting what you cannot change while focusing on what you can. When you experience loss, it's a moment to practice gratitude for what you had rather than bitterness about what you've lost. This training of the mind wasn't meant to make us stoic in the common sense of being emotionally cold or indifferent. Epictetus himself was known for his warmth and compassion toward his students. Rather, it was meant to make us resilient, content, and free to respond to life from a place of wisdom rather than react from a place of emotional turbulence. The former slave understood better than most that true freedom has nothing to do with external circumstances and everything to do with the state of one's mind. A person can be physically and judgments. Conversely, a person can be physically const-free, but mentally enslaved by their desires. Fears reigned but mentally free if they understand what truly belongs to them and what does not. This understanding of freedom became central to everything Epictetus taught, and it reveals itself beautifully in his approach to desire and attachment. He observed that we suffer most not when we lose things, but when we cling too tightly to things that were never truly ours to begin with. Think about it gently for a moment. How often do we speak of my health, my reputation, my success, as if these things were permanent possessions? Epictetus suggested a different way of thinking. These things are more like borrowed treasures, gifts on loan from the universe. We can enjoy them, appreciate them, even work to maintain them, but we cannot own them in any ultimate sense. He used the tender image of holding a child or embracing a loved one. While we hold them close, we can love them fully and completely. But we must remember that they are not ours to keep forever. They are gifts to be cherished in the present moment, not possessions to be grasped with desperate hands. This awareness doesn't diminish our love. It purifies it. It helps us love without the poisonous fear of loss that so often corrupts our affections. The philosopher had a particularly gentle way of helping people understand this principle. When you kiss your child good night, he might say, "Remember that you are kissing a mortal being." This sounds harsh at first, but it's actually profoundly loving. When we truly accept the temporary nature of all things, we become more present, more grateful, more aware of the preciousness of each moment we're given. Epictetus extended this thinking to our roles and identities. We might be parents, professionals, citizens, friends, but these are roles we play rather than who we fundamentally are. Like actors in a great drama, we can throw ourselves fully into our parts while remembering that the play itself is temporary. This perspective allows us to take our responsibilities seriously without taking ourselves too seriously. When we understand that our essential self exists apart from these changing roles and circumstances, we find a kind of unshakable peace. We can lose our job without losing our identity. We can face criticism without feeling fundamentally threatened. We can experience failure without believing we are failures. The teachings of Epictetus also reveal a profound understanding of how our thoughts create our reality. He famously observed that people are disturbed not by things themselves, but by their views on things. The same event can cause joy in one person and misery in another, depending entirely on how they interpret and judge what has happened. This isn't positive thinking or pretending that bad things are actually good. It's something more subtle and more powerful. It's recognizing that between any event and our response to it, there's a small space where our freedom lives. In that space, we choose what meaning to assign to what has happened. We choose what story to tell ourselves about our circumstances. A person loses their job. They can tell themselves a story of failure and shame, or they can tell themselves a story of opportunity and new beginnings. The job loss itself is the same in both cases, but the suffering or excitement that follows depends entirely on which narrative they choose to embrace. Epictetus understood that we are constantly telling ourselves stories about what things mean, what they say about us, what they predict for our future. Most of the time, we're not even aware we're doing this. The stories feel like facts, like the only possible interpretation of events. But with practice, we can learn to recognize these mental narratives for what they are: choices. This recognition is incredibly liberating. If we're choosing our interpretations anyway, why not choose ones that serve us? Why not choose stories that make us stronger, wiser, more compassionate, rather than stories that make us bitter, fearful, or resentful? The former slave also had profound insights about the nature of other people's opinions and how much power we give them over our inner peace. He observed that no one can hurt you without your permission. When someone criticizes you, insults you, or rejects you, they are simply expressing their own judgments and preferences. These judgments have no power over you unless you choose to accept them as true or important. This doesn't mean we should ignore all feedback or become arrogant and closed to growth. Rather, it means we should evaluate others' opinions thoughtfully rather than accepting them automatically. We should consider whether criticism contains useful information while refusing to let it define our worth or disturb our tranquility. Epictetus had a particularly elegant way of illustrating this point. If someone calls you stupid, he might say, they haven't actually made you stupid. They've simply revealed their own judgment about you. You remain exactly as intelligent or unintelligent as you were before they spoke. The only change is that now you know their opinion. Whether this knowledge helps you or hurts you depends entirely on how you choose to receive it. He encouraged his students to respond to insults and criticism with curiosity rather than defensiveness. When someone speaks harshly to you, you might think, "How interesting that they see things this way," or "I wonder what pain or fear is driving them to speak like this." This kind of response doesn't mean you're weak or passive. It means you're responding from wisdom rather than reacting from wounded pride. The philosopher's approach to anger and resentment was equally practical and compassionate. He taught that anger is always a choice, though it rarely feels that way in the moment. When we feel angry, it seems as though someone or something has made us angry, as though our emotion is a natural and inevitable response to external circumstances. But Epictetus suggested that anger is actually a judgment we make about what should or shouldn't happen. We become angry when reality doesn't match our preferences, when people don't behave as we think they should, when events don't unfold according to our plans. The anger isn't caused by these external things. It's caused by our insistence that they should be different. This insight offers a pathway to freedom from the burden of chronic anger and resentment. Instead of demanding that the world conform to our expectations, we can learn to align our expectations with reality. Instead of insisting that people should act differently, we can accept that they will act according to their own nature, understanding, and circumstances. This acceptance doesn't mean we become doormats or stop working for positive change. It means we stop wasting energy on futile resistance to what has already happened or what cannot be changed. We save our energy for thoughtful action toward what actually can be influenced. Epictetus had witnessed enough human nature during his years in slavery and teaching to understand that people generally do what they think is best for them in any given moment. They may be mistaken about what's truly best. They may be acting from ignorance or pain, but they're rarely acting from pure malice. This understanding naturally leads to compassion rather than condemnation. When someone treats you poorly, the philosopher might suggest, consider that they're probably struggling with something you cannot see. Their behavior toward you says more about their inner state than it does about you. This perspective doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does free you from taking it personally and allows you to respond with wisdom rather than wounded pride. The teachings also encompass a beautiful understanding of gratitude and contentment. Epictetus observed that we often make ourselves miserable by focusing on what we lack rather than appreciating what we have. We compare our lives to others, our present situation to some imagined ideal, our reality to our fantasies about how things should be. He suggested a simple but powerful practice. Instead of asking why you don't have more, ask why you have anything at all. Instead of focusing on what's missing from your life, notice what's present. Instead of comparing yourself to those who seem to have more, remember those who have less. This isn't about settling for mediocrity or abandoning healthy ambition. It's about finding contentment in the present moment while working thoughtfully toward your goals. It's about recognizing that happiness isn't something you achieve by acquiring more things or reaching certain milestones. It's something you can access right now by shifting your attention to what's already good in your life. The philosopher understood that contentment is a skill that can be developed through practice. Like learning to play an instrument or speak a foreign language, learning to be content requires patience, repetition, and gentle persistence. Each day offers countless opportunities to practice noticing what's working rather than what's broken, what's beautiful rather than what's flawed, what's possible rather than what's impossible. Epictetus understood that true education isn't about accumulating facts, or learning clever arguments. It's about transforming how we see and respond to life itself. He often reminded his students that philosophy without practice is like medicine that remains in the bottle, potentially helpful, but ultimately useless unless applied to real circumstances. The former slave had a particular gift for helping people recognize the difference between what they thought they knew and what they actually understood. He might ask a student who claimed to grasp his teachings about the dichotomy of control to describe their reaction the last time someone cut them off in traffic or criticized their work. The gap between intellectual understanding and lived wisdom often revealed itself in these everyday moments. This is why Epictetus emphasized that philosophy is not a spectator sport. You cannot learn to swim by reading about water, and you cannot learn to live wisely by merely thinking about wisdom. Each day presents countless opportunities to practice these principles, from minor irritations to major challenges. The person stuck in traffic can practice accepting what cannot be changed while focusing on their own response. The individual facing criticism can practice separating their worth from others' opinions. He taught that we should approach each difficult situation as a kind of cosmic curriculum, designed specifically to help us grow stronger and wiser. When we face rejection, we learn to find validation from within. When we encounter loss, we practice letting go gracefully. When we meet with success, we learn humility and gratitude. Every experience becomes a teacher if we're willing to be students. The philosopher had observed during his years of bondage that external circumstances reveal character rather than create it. Two slaves might face identical treatment, yet one becomes bitter, while the other grows compassionate. Two free citizens might enjoy similar privileges, yet one remains grateful while the other feels entitled. The difference lies not in what happens to them, but in how they choose to interpret and respond to what happens. This insight led Epictetus to a profound understanding about the nature of character development. He taught that virtue color. It's something we develop through countless small choices. Isn't something we're born with or without, like height or eye through daily practice of wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. Each time we choose patience over irritation, acceptance over resistance, kindness over cruelty, we strengthen these inner qualities. The process isn't always easy or pleasant. Just as physical exercise can be uncomfortable in the moment while building strength over time, the exercise of philosophical principles can feel challenging while developing our capacity for peace and wisdom. When we practice accepting criticism without defensiveness, it might feel vulnerable at first. When we work on releasing attachment to outcomes, it might seem scary to let go of control. But Epictetus assured his students that this discomfort is temporary and worthwhile. Like a muscle that grows stronger through resistance, our philosophical muscles grow stronger through the gentle resistance of daily practice. Each time we choose wisdom over impulse, we make it easier to choose wisdom the next time. Tremendous patience with ourselves. We don't become S. The teacher also understood that this kind of inner work requires sages overnight, and expecting perfection from ourselves is just encouraged his students to treat themselves with the same compassion they would show a child another form of trying to control what cannot be controlled. Instead, when we find ourselves reacting emotionally to situations we'd learning to walk, understanding that stumbling is part of the process thought we had mastered. When we discover ourselves attached to outcomes we believed we had released. When we catch ourselves judging circumstances we intended to accept. These aren't failures. They're simply information about where we need more practice. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional responses, but to choose our responses more consciously and skillfully. Epictetus had a beautiful way of describing the relationship between effort and outcome in this inner work. He compared it to tending a garden. We can plant seeds, water them, protect them from weeds, and provide the best conditions we know how to create. But we cannot force the plants to grow, control the weather, or guarantee a perfect harvest. Our job is to do our part with care and dedication, while accepting that the results will unfold according to forces beyond our direct influence. This metaphor applied to every area of life. We can study diligently but cannot control our grades. We can treat others with kindness but cannot control whether they reciprocate. We can work hard at our jobs but cannot control whether we receive promotions. We can care for our health but cannot control whether we get sick. In each case, our happiness and peace of mind depend not on achieving the outcomes we prefer, but on knowing we've done our part with integrity and wisdom. The philosopher's teachings also reveal a deep understanding of how fear shapes so much of human behavior. He observed that many of our seemingly rational choices are actually driven by anxiety about loss, rejection, failure, or death. We cling to possessions because we fear poverty. We seek approval because we fear rejection. We avoid challenges because we fear failure. We distract ourselves from the present because we fear mortality. But Epictetus suggested that these fears lose much of their power when we examine them closely. What exactly are we afraid of losing? Usually things that were never truly ours to begin with, or that cannot ultimately be taken from us. Our reputation exists in other people's minds, not in our essential nature. Our possessions are temporary by their very nature. Our roles and achievements are like costumes we wear, not who we fundamentally are. When we recognize that our deepest fears are often based on illusions about what we can control or what we truly need, we begin to find a different kind of security. Instead of trying to protect ourselves by controlling external circumstances, we find safety in knowing that our peace of mind doesn't depend on external circumstances. This doesn't mean we become reckless or stop caring about outcomes. It means we care about outcomes without being enslaved by them. We work toward goals without making our happiness contingent on achieving them. We love people without demanding that they love us back in specific ways. We engage with life fully while holding our expectations lightly. The former slave understood that this kind of inner freedom is available to anyone, regardless of their external circumstances. A prisoner can be more free than their guard if they understand what true freedom means. A poor person can be more content than a wealthy one if they know the difference between wants and needs. A person facing illness can be more at peace than someone in perfect health if they accept what cannot be changed while focusing on what can be influenced. Epictetus taught that we all carry within us an unassailable dignity that no external force can touch. This dignity doesn't depend on others recognizing it, circumstances supporting it, or achievements proving it. It exists simply because we are conscious beings, capable of choice, capable of wisdom, capable of love. When we remember this truth, we find that we need very little from the outside world to feel complete. The teachings also encompass profound insights about the nature of time and how we relate to past and future. He observed that we often torture ourselves by dwelling on regrets about the past or anxieties about the future, missing the only moment where we actually have any power, the present. The past exists only in memory. the future only an imagination. Our actual life happens now, in this breath, this heartbeat, this choice. This doesn't mean we shouldn't learn from the past or plan for the future. It means we shouldn't allow thoughts about past or future to steal our attention from present opportunities to live wisely. When we find our minds spinning stories about what we should have done differently or what might go wrong tomorrow, we can gently redirect our attention to what we can do right now to align with our values and contribute to our own and others' well-being. Epictetus had a particularly tender understanding of how suffering can become a teacher if we're willing to learn from it. He didn't suggest that pain is always meaningful or that we should seek out difficulty. Rather, he observed that since challenges are inevitable parts of human existence, we might as well extract whatever wisdom and growth they offer. The philosopher who had known physical bondage, bodily pain, and social rejection understood that suffering often reveals strengths we didn't know we possessed and teaches lessons we couldn't learn any other way. It can strip away illusions about what we thought we needed, show us what truly matters, and deepen our compassion for others who struggle. But this transformation doesn't happen automatically. Suffering can also make us bitter, fearful, and closed-hearted if we don't approach it with the right attitude. The difference lies in whether we ask, "Why is this happening to me?" or "What can I learn from this?" Whether we focus on what we're losing or what we might be gaining in wisdom, strength, or understanding. When we face difficult circumstances with curiosity rather than resistance, with acceptance rather than denial, with courage rather than despair, we often discover that we're more resilient than we imagined. We find that our capacity for peace doesn't depend on perfect circumstances, that our ability to love doesn't require being loved in return, that our sense of purpose doesn't need external validation. These insights naturally led Epictetus to a beautiful understanding of what it means to live according to nature. For the Stoics, this phrase didn't mean returning to some primitive state or rejecting civilization. Instead, it meant aligning ourselves with our essential nature as rational social beings capable of wisdom and virtue. It meant accepting the natural order of things while exercising our uniquely human capacity for thoughtful choice. Living according to nature involves recognizing that we are part of something larger than ourselves, connected to other people and to the cosmos itself through invisible threads of interdependence. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the language we speak, the ideas we think, all come to us through countless acts of cooperation and generosity, most of which we never see or acknowledge. This recognition naturally gives rise to what Epictetus saw as our fundamental duty toward others. Since we are all part of the same human family, since we all share the same basic needs for meaning, connection, and peace, we have a responsibility to contribute to the common good. Not because we must, but because doing so aligns with our deepest nature and brings us genuine fulfillment. The philosopher taught that we serve this common good not primarily through grand gestures or heroic acts, though these have their place, but through the simple practice of being decent human beings in our daily interactions. When we treat others with kindness, speak truthfully, keep our commitments, and act with integrity, we strengthen the fabric of trust that holds society together. But Epictetus understood that this service to others must begin with service to our own highest nature. We cannot give what we do not possess. If we are constantly agitated, anxious, and unhappy, we have little peace to offer others. If we are enslaved by our desires and fears, we cannot help others find freedom. If we are bitter and resentful, our attempts at kindness will feel hollow and forced. This is why the philosopher emphasized that working on ourselves isn't selfish. It's actually the most generous thing we can do. Every moment of inner peace we cultivate creates a small ripple of calm in the world. Every fear we transcend makes us better able to help others face their fears. Every attachment we release frees us to love more purely and serve more effectively. The teacher had a gentle way of helping students understand that their personal struggles were not separate from their service to humanity, but intimately connected to it. The patience we develop while dealing with our own mistakes makes us more compassionate toward others' errors. The courage we find while facing our own challenges inspires others to face theirs. The wisdom we gain through our own suffering becomes a gift we can offer to those who are still learning. Epictetus also recognized that this inner work requires tremendous discernment. We live in a world full of competing voices telling us what we should want, how we should feel, what we should fear, what we should pursue. Learning to distinguish between these external messages and our own inner wisdom becomes a crucial skill for anyone seeking genuine peace and purpose. He taught his students to question their desires carefully. When you find yourself wanting something, ask yourself whether this desire is truly your own or whether it has been planted by others. Ask whether pursuing this desire will make you more free or more enslaved. Ask whether achieving what you want will actually bring the satisfaction you imagine, or whether it will simply lead to new wants and new anxieties. This kind of self-examination isn't meant to eliminate all desires, but to help us choose our desires more consciously. There's a difference between wanting something because everyone else seems to want it, and wanting something because it genuinely aligns with our values and contributes to our growth. There's a difference between pursuing goals from a place of fear and pursuing them from a place of love. The former slave understood better than most that external pressures to conform, to compete, to accumulate, to achieve can become subtle forms of bondage if we accept them without question. True freedom requires the courage to define success for ourselves, to choose our own values, to walk our own path, even when it differs from what others expect or recommend. But this independence of thought and choice doesn't mean isolation or arrogance. Epictetus taught that wisdom involves knowing when to stand firm in our principles and when to bend gracefully to circumstances. It means distinguishing between compromising our integrity and adapting our methods. It means recognizing when stubbornness is actually pride in disguise and when flexibility is actually wisdom in action. The philosopher had observed during his years of teaching that people often struggle most with accepting the natural rhythms and cycles of life. We want spring to last forever. We resist the coming of winter. We try to hold on to youth. We deny the reality of aging and death. But fighting against these natural processes only creates unnecessary suffering. Instead, Epictetus suggested we learn to flow with life's seasons while maintaining our inner equilibrium. In times of abundance, we practice gratitude and generosity. In times of scarcity, we practice contentment and creativity. In times of health, we appreciate our vitality without taking it for granted. In times of illness, we focus on what remains possible rather than lamenting what has been lost. This flowing with life's changes requires a delicate balance between effort and acceptance. We work diligently toward our goals while accepting that outcomes will unfold according to forces beyond our control. We care deeply about our relationships while accepting that people grow and change in ways we cannot predict or direct. we invest ourselves fully in meaningful activities, while accepting that all things are temporary. The teacher understood that this balance is not something we achieve once and then maintain effortlessly. It's something we must rediscover again and again as circumstances change and we encounter new challenges. Each season of life brings its own lessons and opportunities for growth. The skills that served us in youth may need to be refined or even replaced as we mature. The perspectives that brought us peace in one situation may need to be adjusted as we face different difficulties. Epictetus taught that this ongoing process of adaptation and growth is not a sign of failure, but a sign of life itself. Like a tree that bends with the wind while keeping its roots firmly planted, we can remain flexible in our methods while staying grounded in our core principles. We can change our strategies while maintaining our integrity. We can evolve our understanding while honoring our deepest values. The philosopher also had profound insights about the relationship between solitude and community. He understood that while we are fundamentally social beings who need connection and belonging, we also need periods of quiet reflection to stay connected to our own inner wisdom. Too much time alone can lead to isolation and self-absorption, but too much time in the company of others can lead to losing ourselves in external opinions and expectations. The key, according to Epictetus, is learning to be comfortable with our own company while remaining open to genuine connection with others. This means developing the capacity to enjoy silence without becoming lonely, to be alone without feeling abandoned, to sit with our own thoughts without becoming anxious or bored. When we are comfortable with solitude, we approach relationships from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. We connect with others because we genuinely enjoy their company, not because we need them to fill some void within us. We can be present with friends and family without constantly seeking their approval or trying to control their responses to us. This inner stability also allows us to be more genuinely helpful to others. When we are not constantly seeking reassurance or validation, we have more energy to offer support, encouragement, and practical assistance to those around us. When we are not trying to manage others' opinions of us, we can focus on understanding their actual needs and responding with appropriate compassion. Epictetus observed that many conflicts in relationships arise not from genuine incompatibility, but from mutual attempts to control each other's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. We want our partners to love us in specific ways, our children to make choices we approve of, our friends to share our interests and values. When they don't conform to our expectations, we feel disappointed, hurt, or angry. But the philosopher suggested that these conflicts diminish significantly when we remember the fundamental distinction between what we can and cannot control. We cannot control how others feel about us, but we can control how we treat them. We cannot control their choices, but we can control our responses to their choices. We cannot control their growth process, but we can control how we support or interfere with it. This understanding leads to a different kind of love, one that is less possessive and more liberating. Instead of loving others for what they give us or how they make us feel, we learn to love them for who they are, including their flaws, struggles, and differences from us. Instead of trying to change them to match our preferences, we focus on changing ourselves to become more accepting, patient, and kind. The former slave knew that this transformation of how we approach relationships doesn't happen overnight. It requires practice, patience, and often the humbling recognition of how controlling and demanding we have been without realizing it. But he assured his students that this work is among the most rewarding we can undertake. both for our own peace of mind and for the health of our connections with others. As we learn to love without grasping, to care without controlling, to support without interfering, our relationships become sources of joy rather than anxiety, growth rather than stagnation, peace rather than conflict. We discover that we can maintain our independence while participating fully in the interdependent web of human connection. Epictetus understood that death, perhaps more than any other aspect of human existence, reveals the truth of what we can and cannot control. We cannot control when, where, or how we will die, but we can control how we live in the face of mortality. We cannot prevent the loss of loved ones, but we can control how we honor their memory and integrate their influence into our ongoing lives. The philosopher didn't encourage morbid preoccupation with death, but rather a gentle, ongoing awareness of life's fragility and preciousness. When we remember that our time here is limited and uncertain, we naturally become more present, more grateful, more focused on what truly matters. Petty annoyances lose their power to disturb us. Grudges seem less important to maintain. Opportunities for kindness become more obvious and compelling. This awareness of mortality also helps us keep our problems in perspective. The traffic jam that feels so frustrating, the criticism that stings so sharply, the disappointment that seems so significant, all fade in importance when viewed against the backdrop of our brief time on this earth. Not because these things don't matter at all, but because they matter less than we often think they do. Epictetus taught that when we truly accept the temporary nature of all things, including our own lives, we paradoxically become more alive, more engaged, more capable of deep appreciation. Like travelers who know their journey has a definite endpoint, we pay closer attention to the scenery, savor the conversations, and treasure the unexpected moments of beauty along the way. The teacher's approach to mortality was neither fearful nor dismissive, but beautifully balanced. He acknowledged death as a natural part of life, while encouraging full engagement with living. He accepted the inevitability of loss, while celebrating the gift of temporary connection. He faced the unknown with equanimity, while extracting maximum meaning from the known. This perspective naturally leads to what might be called a philosophy of grateful presence. Instead of postponing happiness until conditions are perfect, we learn to find joy in imperfect moments. Instead of waiting for major achievements to feel proud of ourselves, we appreciate small acts of kindness and courage. Instead of seeking extraordinary experiences to feel fulfilled, we discover the extraordinary within the ordinary. This philosophy of grateful presence permeates every aspect of how Epictetus approached daily life. He understood that wisdom isn't just for moments of crisis or major decision-making, but for the countless small interactions that make up our ordinary days. How we respond when someone cuts in line ahead of us, how we handle a burnt piece of toast, how we react when technology fails us. These seemingly trivial moments are actually profound opportunities to practice the principles that will serve us when larger challenges arise. The former slave had a remarkable ability to find teaching moments in the most mundane circumstances. A student complaining about the weather might receive a gentle reminder about the futility of resenting what cannot be changed. Someone frustrated with a difficult neighbor might hear about the importance of focusing on our own behavior rather than trying to reform others. A person anxious about an upcoming event might learn about the difference between reasonable preparation and useless worry. What made Epictetus such an effective teacher was his recognition that philosophical principles must be digestible, practical, and immediately applicable. He didn't speak in abstract theoretical terms, but used vivid analogies and everyday examples that his students could easily understand and remember. When they left his school and returned to their daily lives, they carried with them not just ideas, but tools they could actually use. Consider his famous comparison of life to a play. We don't choose our role, he might say, but we can choose how well we perform it. If we're cast as a beggar, we can be the most dignified beggar possible. If we're cast as a king, we can rule with wisdom and humility. The quality of our performance matters more than the nature of our role. This perspective helps us find meaning and purpose, regardless of our circumstances, social position, or external limitations. The philosopher also understood that transformation happens gradually through consistent small choices, rather than through dramatic revelations or sudden changes of heart. Like water slowly wearing away stone, daily practice of philosophical principles gradually reshapes our habitual patterns of thinking and responding. Each time we choose patience over irritation, we make it slightly easier to choose patience the next time. Each time we practice accepting what we cannot change, we strengthen our capacity for acceptance. This gradual approach to change is both realistic and encouraging. It acknowledges that we won't become sages overnight, while assuring us that every small step matters. It recognizes our human tendency toward old patterns while affirming our capacity to develop new ones. It honors where we are while pointing toward where we might grow. Epictetus had observed that people often become discouraged in their philosophical practice because they expect too much too quickly. They want to achieve perfect equanimity immediately, to never feel angry or anxious again, to respond to all situations with flawless wisdom. When they inevitably fall short of these unrealistic expectations, they conclude that the philosophy doesn't work or that they're incapable of growth. But the teacher encouraged his students to think of philosophical development more like learning to play a musical instrument. A beginning pianist doesn't expect to perform a concerto after a few lessons. They start with simple exercises, practice basic scales, and gradually work their way up to more complex pieces. They expect to make mistakes, to have good days and bad days, to progress in fits and starts rather than in a straight line. Similarly, learning to live wisely requires patience with ourselves, forgiveness for our mistakes, and celebration of small improvements. If we respond to a frustrating situation with slightly less anger than usual, that's progress worth acknowledging. If we catch ourselves worrying about something we can't control and manage to redirect our attention to something we can influence, that's a victory worth appreciating. The philosopher's teachings also reveal a deep understanding of how our relationships with others serve as mirrors, reflecting back to us our own areas of strength and growth. The people who irritate us most often trigger reactions that reveal our own attachments and expectations. The individuals we admire most frequently embody qualities we wish to develop in ourselves. The relationships that challenge us most persistently offer the richest opportunities for practicing patience, compassion, and wisdom. Epictetus suggested that instead of avoiding difficult people or situations, we might approach them as cosmic gifts designed to help us grow. The colleague who criticizes our work gives us a chance to practice not taking things personally. The family member who never seems satisfied provides opportunities to practice giving without expecting gratitude. The friend who frequently cancels plans offers lessons in accepting disappointment gracefully. This doesn't mean we should seek out toxic relationships or tolerate abuse. It means we can find value in the challenges that naturally arise in our connections with others, using these experiences as teachers rather than simply enduring them as burdens. When we shift our perspective from, why do I have to deal with this difficult person, to what can this interaction teach me about myself and how to respond more skillfully? For we transform obstacles into opportunities. The former slave also recognized that our judgments about others often reveal more about our own inner state than about the people we're judging. When we find ourselves frequently annoyed by others' behavior, it might indicate that we're stressed, tired, or struggling with our own insecurities. When we notice ourselves being particularly critical, it might suggest that we're being too hard on ourselves and projecting that harshness outward. This insight leads to a more compassionate approach to both ourselves and others. Instead of assuming that our emotional reactions are always justified or that our interpretations of others' motives are always accurate, we can hold our judgments more lightly. We can ask ourselves whether our responses are proportionate to the situation or whether they might be colored by factors we're not fully aware of. Epictetus taught that developing this kind of self-awareness requires honest self-examination without harsh self-criticism. We need to be willing to notice our patterns, acknowledge our blind spots, and recognize our areas for growth. But we also need to do this with the same kindness we would show a good friend who was struggling. Beating ourselves up for our imperfections doesn't lead to improvement. It only adds unnecessary suffering to whatever challenges we're already facing. The teacher had a particularly gentle way of helping students understand that their flaws and struggles don't disqualify them from living meaningful, contributory lives. Everyone has areas where they're still learning and growing. Everyone has moments when they react from fear rather than wisdom, when they let their emotions get the better of them, when they fall short of their own ideals. These human imperfections aren't obstacles to overcome before we can begin living well. They're part of the raw material we work with as we gradually become more skilled at the art of living. A master craftsperson doesn't wait for perfect tools or flawless materials. They learn to create beauty with whatever they have available. Similarly, we don't need to wait until we've perfected ourselves to begin contributing positively to the world around us. The philosopher's approach to personal growth was both ambitious and humble. Ambitious in its vision of what humans are capable of achieving in terms of wisdom, inner peace, and moral development. Humble in its recognition of how long this process takes and how much patience and forgiveness we need to extend to ourselves along the way. This balance between high ideals and realistic expectations creates a sustainable approach to self-improvement. We can aspire to great things without becoming discouraged by our current limitations. We can work diligently toward our goals without becoming obsessed with immediate results. We can take our growth seriously without taking ourselves too seriously. Epictetus understood that one of the greatest obstacles to genuine wisdom is the tendency to compare our inner experience with others' external appearances. We see other people who seem more confident, more successful, more content than we feel, and we assume that they have achieved something we lack or that they know something we don't know. This comparison often leads to discouragement, envy, or the pursuit of external changes that we hope will make us feel different inside. But the teacher reminded his students that we never truly know what's happening in another person's inner world. The individual who appears supremely confident might be struggling with deep insecurities. The person who seems to have everything together might be working hard to maintain that appearance while feeling chaotic inside. The individual who looks completely content might be dealing with challenges we never see. Instead of comparing our insides to others' outsides, Epictetus suggested we focus on our own journey of growth and discovery. Are we kinder today than we were last year? Do we respond to difficulties with more wisdom than we used to? Are we more accepting of what we cannot change and more effective at influencing what we can? These are the comparisons that matter, the measurements that actually help us gauge our progress. The philosopher also recognized that genuine contentment often comes not from achieving everything we want, but from wanting what we already have. This isn't about lowering our standards or abandoning our dreams. It's about finding fulfillment in the present moment while working toward future goals. It's about appreciating the journey itself rather than postponing happiness until we reach some imagined destination. This appreciation for the present doesn't mean we stop planning, preparing, or striving for improvement. It means we don't make our current peace of mind contingent on future achievements. We can work toward better health while being grateful for the body we have now. We can pursue meaningful work while finding purpose in whatever we're currently doing. We can hope for deeper relationships while appreciating the connections that already exist in our lives. Epictetus had a beautiful way of describing this balance between acceptance and aspiration. He compared it to an archer who aims carefully at the target while remaining unattached to whether the arrow hits the bull's eye. The archer gives their best effort to proper form, steady breathing, and accurate aim. But once the arrow is released, the outcome is beyond their control. Their satisfaction comes from knowing they did their part skillfully, not from achieving a specific result. This metaphor applies to every area of life where we want to see improvement or change. We can study diligently for an exam while accepting that the grade we receive will depend on many factors beyond our preparation. We can treat others with kindness while recognizing that their responses to us will be influenced by their own experiences and circumstances. We can work hard at our careers while understanding that promotions, recognition, and financial rewards involve variables we cannot control. The former slave understood that this approach to effort and outcomes isn't about becoming passive or indifferent. It's about becoming more effective by focusing our energy where it can actually make a difference. When we stop wasting mental and emotional energy on things we cannot influence, we have more resources available for the things we can actually affect. This focused approach also leads to greater resilience when things don't go as planned. If our sense of success depends only on factors within our control, then external setbacks cannot fundamentally threaten our well-being. We may feel disappointed when our efforts don't produce the results we hoped for, but we won't feel devastated or defeated because our core sense of worth and purpose remains intact. Epictetus taught that this kind of inner stability becomes particularly important during times of significant change or uncertainty. When external circumstances are shifting rapidly, when the future feels unclear, when the things we've depended on seem unreliable, our ability to find peace within ourselves becomes invaluable. Like a tree with deep roots that can bend with strong winds without breaking, we can adapt to changing conditions while maintaining our essential center. The teacher had lived through enough political upheaval, social transformation, and personal challenges to understand that change is one of the few constants in human experience. Empires rise and fall, technologies advance, social norms evolve, relationships begin and end, bodies age, minds develop new interests and perspectives. Fighting against this natural flow of change only creates suffering. Learning to flow with it while maintaining our core principles creates the possibility for growth, adventure, and ongoing discovery. This acceptance of change doesn't mean we become fatalistic or stop trying to influence outcomes we care about. It means we hold our plans and expectations lightly, ready to adapt when circumstances require flexibility. It means we invest ourselves fully in what we're doing while remaining open to new directions when they emerge. It means we care deeply about our goals while finding meaning in the process of pursuing them, regardless of whether we achieve them exactly as we originally envisioned. The philosopher also understood that learning to live well is fundamentally a creative endeavor. Just as artists work with whatever materials are available to create something beautiful, we work with whatever circumstances we face to create lives of meaning, purpose, and contribution. A painter doesn't complain that blue paint isn't red. They use the blue paint to create something wonderful. Similarly, we don't need perfect conditions to create fulfilling lives. We just need to work skillfully with whatever conditions we actually have. This creative approach to living requires both imagination and practicality. We need to envision possibilities beyond our current limitations while taking concrete steps toward realizing those possibilities. We need to dream about who we might become while accepting who we currently are. We need to hope for better circumstances while making the most of present circumstances. Epictetus had observed that people often limit themselves not because of external obstacles, but because of internal assumptions about what's possible or appropriate for someone in their situation. A slave might assume that wisdom and dignity are only for free citizens. A person without formal education might believe that philosophical understanding is only for scholars. Someone who has made mistakes might think that redemption and growth are no longer available to them. But the teacher's own life demonstrated that transformation is possible regardless of starting conditions. He had moved from slavery to freedom, from powerlessness to influence, from suffering to wisdom. Not through changing his external circumstances, though that happened eventually, but through changing his relationship to whatever circumstances he faced. This inner transformation is available to anyone willing to undertake the patient work of examining their thoughts, questioning their assumptions, practicing new responses, and gradually developing greater wisdom and compassion. It doesn't require special talents, extraordinary circumstances, or perfect conditions. It only requires willingness to begin wherever we are and keep practicing, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment at a time. The former slave's teachings continue to offer guidance and comfort nearly 2,000 years after his death, because they address the timeless aspects of human experience. We all face uncertainty, loss, disappointment, and change. We all struggle with desires that seem to promise happiness, but often deliver anxiety instead. We all seek meaning, purpose, and peace in a world that can feel chaotic and unpredictable. But Epictetus reminds us that within these universal challenges lie universal opportunities for growth, wisdom, and fulfillment. The same experiences that can make us bitter can also make us compassionate. The same setbacks that can discourage us can also strengthen our resilience. The same uncertainties that can frighten us can also invite us to trust in our ability to handle whatever comes. His gentle voice across the centuries whispers that we have more power than we often realize, and less control than we sometimes think we need. That our happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances aligning perfectly, but on our inner alignment with wisdom and virtue. That we don't need to wait for ideal conditions to begin living well. We can start exactly where we are, with exactly what we have in this very moment. As you settle deeper into rest tonight, perhaps you can carry with you this simple but profound recognition that whatever tomorrow brings, you have within you the capacity to respond with wisdom, courage, and compassion. that the peace you seek isn't hidden in some distant achievement or perfect situation, but available right now in your willingness to accept what cannot be changed, while thoughtfully engaging with what can be influenced. The teachings of Epictetus offer not escape from the challenges of being human, but a way of meeting those challenges that transforms them from burdens into teachers, from obstacles into opportunities, from sources of suffering into pathways toward wisdom. In his quiet moments of teaching, Epictetus would often return to the image of morning dew. Each droplet appears so fragile, so temporary, yet it reflects the entire sky within its tiny sphere. He saw human life much the same way. We are small, brief, vulnerable creatures, yet within each of us lies the capacity to reflect the vastness of wisdom, the depth of compassion, the beauty of virtue. This reflection isn't something we achieve through grand gestures or heroic acts, though these have their place. It happens through countless small moments of choosing wisely over choosing easily. When we pause before reacting in anger, we reflect wisdom. When we offer kindness to someone who hasn't earned it, we reflect compassion. When we tell the truth when a lie would be more convenient, we reflect integrity. The philosopher understood that these micro-choices accumulate over time like interest in a bank account. Each moment of patience deposits a little more calm into our character. Each act of courage builds our capacity to face future challenges. Each practice of acceptance strengthens our ability to find peace regardless of circumstances. We become what we repeatedly choose to be, not through any single decision, but through the pattern of our daily selections. But Epictetus also recognized that this process requires tremendous gentleness with ourselves. We are not trying to become perfect beings who never feel anger, fear, or disappointment. We are learning to feel these emotions without being controlled by them. We are developing the ability to experience the full spectrum of human feeling while maintaining our inner equilibrium, like a skilled sailor who feels every movement of the sea but keeps the ship steady through the storm. The teacher had a profound understanding of what he called the inner citadel, that core part of ourselves that remains untouchable regardless of external circumstances. This isn't a place of coldness or detachment, but rather the warm center of our being where our deepest values reside. It's the part of us that can observe our emotions without being swept away by them, that can witness our thoughts without believing every story they tell, that can experience pain without adding unnecessary suffering through resistance. Accessing this inner citadel requires practice, like learning to find your balance on a moving ship. At first, every wave throws you off center, but gradually you develop what sailors call sea legs, the ability to stay steady even when everything around you is in motion. Similarly, we can develop what might be called life legs, the capacity to remain centered even when circumstances are turbulent. This centeredness doesn't mean we become emotionally numb or spiritually bypassed. We still feel joy and sorrow, hope and disappointment, love and loss. But we feel them from a place of stability rather than reactivity. We can be deeply moved by beauty without desperately clinging to it. We can be genuinely saddened by loss without being destroyed by it. We can be authentically angry about injustice without being consumed by rage. Epictetus taught that this emotional maturity develops naturally as we practice distinguishing between what enhances our essential well-being and what merely provides temporary pleasure or relief. Many things that feel good in the moment, like revenge, gossip, or self-pity, actually diminish our inner peace over time. Conversely, many things that require effort in the moment, like forgiveness, honesty, or self-discipline contribute to our long-term flourishing. Learning to make this distinction requires what the philosopher called prosoche, a kind of mindful attention to our inner processes. We begin to notice the subtle difference between desires that arise from our authentic nature and those that are imposed by external pressures. We start to recognize the gap between our automatic reactions and our considered responses. We develop sensitivity to the quiet voice of wisdom that speaks beneath the louder voices of fear, anger, and wanting. This inner attunement is like learning to tune a musical instrument. At first, you might not be able to hear when a string is slightly off pitch, but as your ear develops, you become increasingly sensitive to even small variations from true harmony. Similarly, as we practice philosophical attention, we become more aware of when our thoughts and emotions are slightly off balance and better able to make the small adjustments that restore our inner harmony. The former slave understood that this work of inner tuning never ends. Like a musician who checks their instrument before every performance, we need to regularly check our inner alignment. Are we responding to life from a place of wisdom or merely reacting from habit? Are our choices reflecting our deepest values or simply our immediate impulses? Are we moving toward greater freedom or creating new forms of bondage for ourselves? These questions aren't meant to create anxiety or self-judgment, but to maintain the kind of gentle awareness that allows for course correction. When a ship's captain notices they're drifting off course, they don't panic or abandon the journey. They simply adjust the rudder and continue toward their destination. Similarly, when we notice our thoughts or behaviors drifting away from our ideals, we can make gentle adjustments without drama or self-condemnation. Epictetus had a particular gift for helping people understand that perfection isn't the goal of philosophical practice. The goal is progress, not perfection. Growth, not flawlessness. Increasing wisdom, not complete knowledge. This understanding takes enormous pressure off the process and makes it sustainable over the long term. He often reminded his students that even advanced practitioners continue to face challenges and make mistakes. The difference isn't that they never struggle, it's that they struggle more skillfully. They recognize their patterns more quickly, recover their balance more easily, and learn from their missteps more effectively. They've developed what might be called philosophical resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks without losing their fundamental orientation toward wisdom and virtue. This resilience becomes particularly important during what the teacher recognized as the inevitable seasons of difficulty that visit every human life. Times when loss accumulates, when health fails, when relationships end, when dreams don't materialize, when the future feels uncertain or frightening. During these periods, our philosophical practice becomes less like a hobby and more like a lifeline. But Epictetus assured his students that these difficult seasons also offer unique opportunities for growth that aren't available during easier times. Prosperity can make us soft and complacent. Adversity, while painful, can strengthen our character and deepen our wisdom. It strips away illusions about what we thought we needed and reveals what we actually require for genuine well-being. The philosopher had observed that people often emerge from significant challenges with greater clarity about their priorities, deeper appreciation for simple pleasures, stronger compassion for others who suffer, and increased confidence in their ability to handle whatever life presents. Not because suffering is inherently good, but because difficulty can become a teacher if we approach it with the right attitude. This doesn't mean we should seek out hardship or romanticize pain. It means we can find meaning and growth within the challenges that naturally arise, transforming obstacles into stepping stones toward greater wisdom and resilience. Like a river that becomes stronger and clearer as it flows around rocks and through narrow passages, we can use life's difficulties to develop qualities that serve us and others. And so, as the night grows deeper and your thoughts begin to soften, perhaps you can rest knowing that the wisdom of Epictetus lives on, not in dusty books or academic debates, but in every moment you choose acceptance over resistance, compassion over judgment, courage over fear. His gentle teachings remind us that freedom isn't found in controlling the world around us, but in understanding what truly belongs to us and what does not. Sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow with a little more peace, a little more wisdom, and a heart that remembers its own unshakable dignity. Welcome back to Philosophy for Sleep, where we explore the deepest questions of human existence, one gentle thought at a time. Tonight, we're embarking on a slow, contemplative journey into the mind of one of philosophy's most misunderstood figures, Friedrich Nietzsche, a man whose ideas were both revolutionary and deeply personal, whose writings challenged everything we thought we knew about morality, meaning, and what it means to be truly alive. As always, I hope this exploration helps you drift off peacefully, or at least offers you a moment of quiet reflection as we wander through the landscape of existential thought. There's a small chance that these ideas might be too intriguing and keep you awake. But if that happens, well, at least you'll have encountered some of the most profound questions ever asked about human existence. Before we begin this gentle descent into Nietzschean philosophy, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Are you tucked into bed in Berlin at midnight, contemplating existence? Or perhaps you're listening from a quiet corner in San Francisco at 9 in the evening, letting these thoughts wash over you like waves. Let me know in the comments. It's always wonderful to see our community of thoughtful souls scattered across the globe, united by curiosity and the search for understanding. Now settle in, get comfortable, you don't need to memorize any of this. You don't need to take notes or analyze every concept. Just let these ideas flow over you like a gentle stream of consciousness. And as we begin this quiet exploration of existence and meaning, remember that this content is for educational and relaxation purposes only, not as a substitute for professional philosophical or psychological guidance. Ready? Let's begin our journey into the existential world of Friedrich Nietzsche. When most people hear the name Nietzsche, they might think of a dark, brooding figure preaching nihilism and despair. They might recall fragments about the death of God, or quotes taken wildly out of context. But this popular image misses something essential about Nietzsche's philosophy. Far from being a prophet of meaninglessness, Nietzsche was actually deeply concerned with how human beings could create authentic, meaningful lives in a world that no longer provided ready-made answers. Picture a man walking through the quiet streets of Turin in the late 1800s, his mind racing with ideas that would reshape how we think about existence itself. This was Nietzsche in his final productive years, wrestling with questions that still keep philosophers awake at night. What does it mean to live authentically? How do we create our own values when traditional sources of meaning have crumbled? And perhaps most importantly, how do we affirm life fully, even in the face of suffering and uncertainty? To understand Nietzsche's existentialism, we need to start with what he saw as the fundamental crisis of his time: the slow death of traditional religious and moral certainties. For centuries, people had found meaning and direction through established institutions, divine commandments, and inherited wisdom. But Nietzsche observed that these foundations were beginning to crumble under the weight of scientific discovery, historical criticism, and the general march of modernity. This wasn't something Nietzsche celebrated with glee, as some imagine. Instead, he recognized it as both a tremendous opportunity and a terrifying responsibility. When the old gods die, when traditional moralities lose their power to guide us, human beings are faced with a choice. We can either despair at the absence of predetermined meaning, or we can embrace the freedom to create meaning for ourselves. This is where Nietzsche's famous proclamation that God is dead comes into play. It wasn't a theological statement so much as a cultural diagnosis. Nietzsche was observing that the Christian worldview that had shaped Western civilization for over 1,000 years was losing its grip on people's hearts and minds. The death of God wasn't something that happened in heaven. It was something that was happening in the souls of ordinary people as they gradually stopped believing that their lives had cosmic significance, predetermined by a divine plan. But here's what makes Nietzsche's response so fascinating. Rather than concluding that life is therefore meaningless, he argued that this death of traditional meaning creates space for something far more authentic: the possibility of self-created meaning. When we're no longer bound by inherited values and predetermined purposes, we become free to forge our own path, to determine our own values, to become who we truly are, rather than who we've been told we should be. This leads us to one of Nietzsche's most beautiful and challenging concepts: the idea of becoming who you are. It sounds simple enough, but Nietzsche understood that most people never actually become themselves. Instead, they live their entire lives as copies of others, following scripts written by their culture, their family, their social class, or their religious tradition. They mistake conformity for virtue and never discover their own unique potential. Nietzsche believed that authentic existence required what he called self-overcoming, not in the sense of becoming superhuman or dominating others, but in the sense of continuously growing beyond your current limitations, questioning your inherited assumptions, and creating yourself anew. It's a process that never ends, a constant becoming rather than a final being. Imagine a sculptor working with a block of marble. Traditional morality might provide a predetermined pattern to follow, a blueprint for what the final statue should look like. But Nietzsche's approach would be more like giving the sculptor complete freedom to discover what figure might emerge from that particular piece of stone. The sculptor becomes both the artist and the artwork, continuously reshaping themselves through their choices and actions. This process of self-creation isn't easy or comfortable. It requires what Nietzsche called the courage to be oneself, in a world that constantly pressures us to be someone else. It means taking full responsibility for our choices and their consequences. It means accepting that there's no cosmic guarantee that our self-created values are correct or that our chosen path will lead to happiness. This brings us to another crucial aspect of Nietzschean existentialism: his understanding of suffering and its role in human life. Unlike philosophical traditions that see suffering as something to be minimized or eliminated, Nietzsche argued that suffering is often necessary for growth and authenticity. Not suffering for its own sake, but the kind of productive struggle that comes from pushing beyond our comfort zones and challenging ourselves to become more than we currently are. Think of it like the tension in a violin string. Without tension, there's no music. But too much tension and the string snaps. Nietzsche believed that human beings need a certain amount of creative tension in their lives to produce anything beautiful or meaningful. The person who avoids all difficulty and challenge may be comfortable, but they'll never discover their full potential. This doesn't mean Nietzsche was advocating for unnecessary suffering or that he believed pain was inherently good. Rather, he recognized that meaningful existence often requires us to embrace difficulties that others might try to avoid. The artist who struggles with their craft, the thinker who wrestles with complex problems, the person who takes on challenging responsibilities. All of these individuals are engaging in the kind of productive suffering that can lead to growth and self-realization. But perhaps the most radical aspect of Nietzsche's existentialism is his concept of amor fati, or love of fate. This isn't passive acceptance of whatever happens to us. Instead, it's an active embrace of our entire existence, including the parts we might wish were different. It's the ability to say yes to life as a whole, not just to the pleasant parts. Imagine being able to look back at your life and affirm every moment of it, every joy and every sorrow, every triumph and every failure, because all of it contributed to making you who you are. This doesn't mean pretending that painful experiences weren't painful, but rather recognizing that even our struggles and setbacks can become sources of strength and wisdom if we approach them with the right attitude. Nietzsche sometimes expressed this idea through the thought experiment of eternal recurrence. He asked us to imagine that we would have to live our exact same life over and over again, infinitely, with every detail repeated exactly as it happened. Would we be able to embrace such a fate? Would we love our life enough to want to experience it again and again forever? This isn't meant as a literal description of how time works, but as a test of how fully we're living. If the thought of eternal recurrence fills us with horror, it might suggest that we're not living authentically, that we're wasting our precious existence on things that don't really matter to us. But if we can imagine embracing eternal recurrence, it indicates that we're living in harmony with our deepest values and truest self. This leads us to what might be the most beautiful aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy: his vision of life as a creative work of art. Just as an artist doesn't create according to predetermined rules, but follows their own aesthetic vision, Nietzsche believed that each person should approach their existence as a creative project. We are both the artist and the canvas, continuously painting and repainting ourselves through our choices, relationships, and actions. This artistic approach to existence doesn't mean being selfish or ignoring the needs of others. Rather, it means taking responsibility for creating a life that reflects our authentic values and unique perspective. It means treating our existence as something precious and meaningful, worthy of careful attention and creative energy. Think of how a painter approaches a blank canvas. There's both freedom and responsibility in that emptiness. The artist can create anything, but that very freedom can be overwhelming. Where to begin? What colors to use? What vision to pursue? Nietzsche believed that human existence presents us with a similar creative challenge and opportunity. The canvas of existence is never truly blank, of course. We inherit certain circumstances, certain biological tendencies, certain cultural contexts. But within those constraints, we have tremendous freedom to choose how we respond, what we emphasize, what we develop, and what we let fade into the background. Nietzsche understood that authentic living requires us to work creatively with the materials we've been given, transforming them into something uniquely our own. This creative approach to existence brings us to one of Nietzsche's most profound insights about human psychology: his understanding of what he called the will to power. Now, this phrase has been terribly misunderstood and misused throughout history. It's often interpreted as a desire to dominate others or accumulate external power. But for Nietzsche, the will to power was something much more subtle and internal. The will to power is really the will to become, the drive toward growth, self-expansion, and creative expression. It's the force that pushes a plant toward sunlight, that drives an artist to perfect their craft, that compels a thinker to pursue truth, even when it's uncomfortable. It's not about power over others, but about the power to realize your own potential, to overcome your own limitations, to become more fully yourself. Think of a musician practicing scales in a quiet room late at night. They're not doing this to impress anyone or to gain power over others. They're responding to an internal drive to master their instrument, to express something that exists deep within them. This is will to power in its purest form. The desire to grow beyond current limitations and create something meaningful. Nietzsche believed that this drive is present in all living things, but human beings are unique in their ability to consciously direct and channel it. We can choose what to develop, what to pursue, what kinds of power to seek. We can direct our will to power toward creative endeavors, toward personal growth, toward building meaningful relationships, toward contributing something valuable to the world. But here's where Nietzsche's psychology becomes particularly interesting. He recognized that the will to power can also take negative forms. When people feel powerless in their own lives, when they can't find healthy outlets for their creative energy, the will to power can turn destructive. It might manifest as the desire to tear others down, to exercise petty control, to seek revenge against life itself. This insight led Nietzsche to one of his most important distinctions: the difference between what he called master morality and slave morality. These aren't political or social categories, but psychological orientations that anyone might adopt regardless of their actual social position. Master morality emerges from a sense of personal strength and creative power. People operating from this mindset tend to create their own values based on what they experience as life-affirming and growth-promoting. They ask questions like, what brings out the best in me? What allows me to flourish? What contributes to my becoming who I truly am? Their moral judgments flow from their own experience of vitality and excellence. Slave morality, on the other hand, emerges from a sense of powerlessness and resentment. Rather than creating values from personal experience of what works, it tends to define good and evil in reaction to others. It asks, what will protect me from those who seem stronger? How can I make the powerful feel guilty? What values will level the playing field? Slave morality is reactive rather than creative, defensive rather than expansive. Nietzsche wasn't advocating for actual masters and slaves, nor was he defending social hierarchy. Instead, he was describing different ways that individuals might relate to their own power and potential. Anyone can operate from either master or slave morality, depending on their psychological state and life circumstances. The person who creates art because it brings them joy is operating from master morality. The person who criticizes others' art primarily because they feel inadequate about their own creative limitations is operating from slave morality. The entrepreneur who builds something because they believe in its value is expressing master morality. The employee who primarily complains about their boss without taking steps to improve their own situation is caught in slave morality. What makes this psychological insight so valuable is that it helps us understand our own motivations more clearly. When we find ourselves feeling resentful, critical, or reactive, we might ask whether we're operating from a sense of our own power and creativity, or from a sense of powerlessness and defensiveness. This doesn't mean that all criticism is bad, or that we should never feel angry about injustice. But Nietzsche's distinction helps us examine whether our responses are coming from a place of strength and authenticity, or from weakness and resentment. Are we creating the kind of life we want to live, or are we primarily reacting against lives others are living? This psychological framework becomes particularly important when we consider Nietzsche's approach to moral values themselves. Unlike many philosophers who tried to discover universal moral truths that would apply to all people in all circumstances, Nietzsche believed that values are human creations. They emerge from particular perspectives, serve particular purposes, and reflect particular ways of being in the world. This doesn't make values arbitrary or meaningless. Just because something is created rather than discovered doesn't make it less important. Art is created by humans, but that doesn't make it worthless. Language is a human creation, but it's still essential for communication and thought. Similarly, moral values are human creations that serve crucial functions in organizing our lives and relationships. But recognizing the human origins of values does free us from the burden of believing that there's only one right way to live. Different people, with different temperaments, circumstances, and goals, might legitimately create different value systems. What matters is not whether our values match some external standard, but whether they emerge authentically from our own experience and support our own flourishing. This leads to what might be the most liberating aspect of Nietzsche's existentialism, the recognition that we are not condemned to live according to values that don't fit our actual nature and circumstances. If inherited moral systems make us feel diminished, resentful, or inauthentic, we have the freedom and responsibility to examine them critically and create alternatives that better serve our growth and happiness. Imagine discovering that you've been trying to live your entire life according to rules designed for someone else's personality and circumstances. Perhaps you've been forcing yourself to be extroverted when your nature is contemplative, or trying to be perfectly selfless when healthy self-care would serve everyone better, including those you want to help. Nietzsche's philosophy suggests that recognizing these mismatches isn't selfish or immoral, but rather a necessary step toward authentic existence. This process of value creation isn't something that happens once and then we're finished. It's an ongoing project that requires constant attention and refinement. As we grow and change, as our circumstances shift, as we gain new experiences and insights, our values might need to evolve as well. The person who clings rigidly to values that no longer fit their actual life situation is likely to experience increasing internal conflict and dissatisfaction. But this ongoing process of value creation and refinement requires tremendous courage. It's much easier to follow predetermined rules than to take responsibility for creating our own guidelines for living. When we create our own values, we can't blame anyone else if things don't work out as we hoped. We become fully responsible for the consequences of our choices. This responsibility can feel overwhelming, but Nietzsche believed it's also the source of human dignity and meaning. When we take responsibility for creating our own values and directing our own lives, we become genuine authors of our existence rather than passive characters in someone else's story. We transform from being mere products of our circumstances into active creators of our own destiny. This creative responsibility extends beyond just our personal values to encompass our entire approach to existence. Nietzsche encouraged us to see our lives as works of art in progress, constantly being shaped and reshaped through our choices and actions. Just as an artist doesn't create according to a predetermined formula, but follows their own aesthetic vision, we can approach our existence as an ongoing creative project. This artistic approach to living doesn't mean being selfish or ignoring the needs of others. Great art often serves purposes beyond the artist's personal satisfaction. It can inspire others, contribute to cultural conversations, or help people see the world in new ways. Similarly, a life lived as a work of art can contribute to the flourishing of family, community, and humanity as a whole, while still being authentically personal and creative. The key insight is that this contribution flows most naturally and powerfully when it emerges from authentic self-expression rather than from duty or obligation alone. The musician who creates beautiful music, because it emerges naturally from their deepest being, is likely to touch others more profoundly than the musician who creates merely because they think they should. The parent who expresses love authentically is likely to nurture their children more effectively than the parent who follows parenting rules without genuine feeling behind them. This doesn't mean that duty and obligation are always wrong, but rather that they work best when they align with and express our deeper, authentic nature rather than contradicting or suppressing it. Nietzsche believed that the most powerful and meaningful human actions emerge when external responsibility and internal authenticity support and amplify each other rather than being in constant conflict. This harmony between inner authenticity and outer responsibility brings us to one of Nietzsche's most nuanced insights about human relationships and society. He recognized that we are inherently social beings who cannot create ourselves in isolation from others. But he also saw how easily social expectations and pressures can corrupt our authentic development, leading us to become what others want us to be, rather than who we truly are. The challenge, as Nietzsche understood it, is to find ways of engaging with others that enhance rather than diminish our authenticity. This requires what we might call selective solitude and selective community. There are times when we need to withdraw from social influences to hear our own inner voice clearly. But there are also times when engaging with others can help us discover aspects of ourselves we might never find in isolation. Think of a musician who practices alone for hours to develop their unique style, but who also needs to play with others to discover the full range of what their music can become. The solitude allows for authentic development, while the community provides opportunities for expression and growth that would be impossible alone. Nietzsche believed that meaningful human existence requires a similar balance between self-development and genuine connection with others. But not all social connections are equally valuable for authentic development. Nietzsche distinguished between relationships that encourage our growth and becoming, and those that keep us trapped in familiar but limiting patterns. Some people in our lives function as mirrors, reflecting back to us who we already are. Others function as windows, helping us see possibilities we hadn't previously imagined. The relationships that truly support our authenticity are those where we feel free to explore and express different aspects of ourselves without fear of judgment or rejection. These might be friendships where we can share our deepest questions and uncertainties, romantic partnerships where vulnerability feels safe, or mentoring relationships where growth is actively encouraged. Conversely, relationships that require us to suppress important parts of ourselves or that punish us for growing and changing can become obstacles to authentic existence. This doesn't necessarily make such relationships evil or wrong, but it does suggest that we need to be thoughtful about how much of our energy and attention we invest in them. Nietzsche also understood that authentic relationships often involve a certain amount of creative tension. When two people are both committed to their own growth and becoming, they may sometimes challenge each other in uncomfortable but ultimately beneficial ways. The friend who lovingly but honestly points out our blind spots, the partner who encourages us to pursue dreams we're afraid to attempt, the colleague who holds us to higher standards than we might set for ourselves. This kind of supportive challenge is very different from criticism that emerges from resentment or the desire to control. Authentic relationships involve people who want the best for each other, even when that means growing beyond current limitations or comfortable patterns. They create space for both individuals to become more fully themselves, rather than trying to keep each other fixed in familiar roles. This brings us to Nietzsche's understanding of what he called friendship as the highest form of human relationship. For Nietzsche, true friendship wasn't just about enjoying each other's company or providing mutual support, though both of those elements might be present. Rather, friendship at its deepest level involves two people who are committed to each other's authentic development and self-realization. Imagine two artists who inspire and challenge each other to reach new levels of creative expression. Two thinkers who help each other develop more nuanced and powerful ideas. Two individuals who see potential in each other that neither might see alone. This is friendship as Nietzsche understood it. A relationship dedicated to mutual becoming rather than mutual comfort. Such friendships are rare because they require both people to be committed to their own growth and courageous enough to support growth in others, even when it's inconvenient or challenging. It's easier to surround ourselves with people who keep us feeling safe and confirmed in our current patterns than to seek out relationships that invite us to become more than we currently are. But Nietzsche believed that this kind of friendship represents one of the highest possibilities of human existence. When we find people who can see our potential and encourage its development, while also allowing us to play that same role in their lives, we create the conditions for mutual flourishing that benefits not just the individuals involved, but potentially everyone they encounter. This understanding of friendship extends naturally into Nietzsche's broader vision of how human communities might be organized to support rather than suppress individual authenticity and development. He wasn't particularly interested in political theory in the conventional sense, but he did have ideas about what kinds of cultural conditions would be most likely to produce creative, authentic, flourishing human beings. Rather than advocating for any particular political system, Nietzsche seemed most interested in cultural attitudes and values that would encourage individual creativity and self-development, while also fostering genuine community. He envisioned societies where diversity of perspective and approach would be celebrated rather than feared, where people would be encouraged to develop their unique gifts rather than pressured to conform to standard patterns. This doesn't mean Nietzsche supported chaos or the absence of all social structure. He understood that human beings need some degree of order and stability to flourish, but he believed that the best social structures would be flexible enough to accommodate different ways of being human, rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. Consider the difference between a garden where every plant is trimmed to the same shape and height, and a garden where different plants are allowed to grow according to their nature while still contributing to an overall harmony. Nietzsche's vision of human community was more like the second type of garden, where individual authenticity and collective flourishing support each other, rather than being in constant tension. This vision requires a fundamental shift in how we think about the relationship between individual and community. Rather than seeing these as opposing forces, where more individual freedom necessarily means less social cohesion, Nietzsche suggested that authentic individuals are actually more capable of genuine community than people who are merely conforming to external expectations. When people are living authentically, expressing their real values, and developing their actual gifts, they have something genuine to contribute to collective life. Their participation in community emerges from their strength rather than their weakness, from their abundance rather than their neediness. They engage with others not primarily to get something they lack, but to share something they have discovered or created. This leads to what might be called communities of creators, rather than communities of consumers. Instead of groups of people who come together primarily to take care of mutual needs or to protect themselves from external threats, we might imagine communities of people who come together to share and develop their creative gifts, to inspire and challenge each other toward greater authenticity and excellence. Such communities would naturally be diverse, because authentic individuals tend to develop in different directions according to their unique nature and circumstances. But this diversity would be a source of richness rather than conflict, because each person's authentic development would contribute something valuable that others could learn from or be inspired by. This brings us to one of the most profound aspects of Nietzsche's existentialism, his understanding of what it means to affirm life fully. Throughout his philosophical development, Nietzsche was deeply concerned with what he saw as life-denying attitudes that had become prevalent in his culture. Religious traditions that taught people to despise the physical world in favor of some spiritual realm. Moral systems that made people feel guilty about natural human desires and impulses. Philosophical approaches that emphasized rational analysis at the expense of lived experience. Nietzsche didn't reject all religious, moral, or philosophical insights, but he was particularly concerned with those that seemed to diminish people's capacity to embrace and enjoy their actual existence. He wanted to develop ways of thinking and being that would enhance rather than detract from our ability to say yes to life as it actually is, not as we might wish it were. This life affirmation isn't naive optimism that pretends difficulties and suffering don't exist. Nietzsche was well acquainted with pain, illness, isolation, and disappointment. His philosophical development was deeply influenced by his own struggles with physical health, social relationships, and professional recognition. He understood that any authentic approach to existence must account for life's inevitable challenges and losses. But rather than concluding that these difficulties make life not worth living, Nietzsche developed what we might call a tragic optimism. The recognition that life includes suffering, uncertainty, and limitation, combined with the determination to embrace and affirm existence anyway, not despite its difficulties, but as a complete package that includes both joy and sorrow, success and failure, connection and solitude. This tragic optimism requires a fundamental shift in how we relate to life's challenges. Instead of seeing difficulties as evidence that something is wrong with existence, we might learn to see them as integral parts of what makes life meaningful and growth possible. The musician who never encounters technical challenges will never develop their skills. The person who never faces moral dilemmas will never develop ethical sensitivity. The individual who never experiences loss will never fully appreciate connection. From this perspective, the goal isn't to eliminate all difficulty from life, but to develop the strength and wisdom to engage with difficulties creatively rather than being overwhelmed or embittered by them. This requires what Nietzsche called spiritual health, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of psychological resilience and vitality that allows us to meet life's challenges with curiosity and courage rather than fear and resentment. This spiritual health emerges naturally when we're living authentically, when our actions and choices flow from our genuine values and deep understanding of our own nature, when we're trying to be someone we're not, or when we're pursuing goals that don't actually matter to us. We tend to feel depleted and fragile in the face of difficulties. But when we're aligned with our authentic self and pursuing meaningful objectives, we often find that we have more resilience and energy than we expected. Think of the difference between doing work that feels meaningless versus engaging in activities that connect with your deepest sense of purpose. The meaningless work drains energy even when it's relatively easy, while purposeful activity can be energizing even when it's challenging. Nietzsche believed that this same principle applies to existence as a whole. When we're living authentically, even difficulties can contribute to our sense of vitality and growth rather than simply wearing us down. This understanding brings us to one of Nietzsche's most beautiful and challenging invitations: the possibility of loving our fate completely, not just accepting it, but actively embracing it as the necessary foundation for everything valuable in our existence. This amor fati represents perhaps the highest expression of existential courage, the ability to affirm our entire life story, including the parts we might have chosen differently. This complete affirmation doesn't require us to pretend that painful experiences weren't painful, or that we enjoyed difficulties while they were happening. Rather, it invites us to recognize that even our struggles and setbacks have contributed to making us who we are, and that who we are includes capacities for wisdom, compassion, creativity, and strength that might never have developed under easier circumstances. When we can look back at our lives and feel grateful, not just for the good times, but for the complete journey that brought us to where we are, we achieve a kind of existential peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. We become capable of saying yes to existence as a whole, not because it's been easy, but because it's been ours. This complete life affirmation creates the foundation as the highest human possibility, the ability to create and live according to our own, for what Nietzsche saw authentic values, while simultaneously contributing something valuable to the ongoing human conversation about how life might best be lived. We become both students and teachers, both individuals pursuing our own development and community members sharing our discoveries with others. This brings us to what might be Nietzsche's most profound insight about human existence: the realization that we are meaning-making creatures, living in a universe that doesn't come with built-in meaning. This isn't a cause for despair, but rather the foundation for authentic freedom. When we understand that meaning isn't something we discover like a hidden treasure, but something we create through our choices and actions, we become genuine authors of our own existence. Picture a blank page before a writer. The emptiness isn't a problem to be solved, but a space of infinite possibility. Each word chosen, each sentence crafted, each paragraph developed, contributes to creating something that didn't exist before. Nietzsche believed that human existence presents us with a similar creative opportunity. We start with the raw materials of our biology, our circumstances, our cultural inheritance, and from these, we can craft something uniquely our own. This creative approach to existence requires what Nietzsche called intellectual honesty, the courage to examine our beliefs, assumptions, and values without flinching from uncomfortable truths. Most people, he observed, live their entire lives within unquestioned frameworks inherited from their family, culture, or historical moment. They mistake these inherited patterns for natural laws or divine commands, never realizing that they have the freedom to examine and potentially revise them. Intellectual honesty doesn't mean rejecting everything we've inherited. Some traditional wisdom may serve us well, and some cultural patterns may align perfectly with our authentic nature. But it does mean taking responsibility for consciously choosing which influences to embrace and which to set aside. It means moving from unconscious conformity to conscious selection. This process can be unsettling because it removes the comfort of certainty. When we realize that our moral beliefs, our life goals, even our sense of personal identity are human constructions rather than cosmic facts, we might initially feel unmoored. The solid ground we thought we were standing on reveals itself to be more like a ship that we've been sailing without realizing we were the captain. But this initial disorientation often gives way to a profound sense of liberation. When we understand that we are not bound by predetermined scripts, that we have much more freedom than we previously imagined, new possibilities begin to open up. We might discover that we've been limiting ourselves unnecessarily, following rules that don't actually serve our flourishing, pursuing goals that don't reflect our deepest values. Nietzsche sometimes described this liberation through the metaphor of spiritual metamorphosis. He envisioned 3 stages in the development of human consciousness. First, the camel stage, where we dutifully carry the burdens and expectations placed on us by others. We say, "Thou shalt," and obediently follow the commands we've inherited. This isn't necessarily wrong. It's often a necessary stage of learning and development. But eventually, some people progress to the lion stage, where they develop the courage to say, "I will not." They begin to reject inherited values and expectations that don't serve their authentic development. They learn to roar no to demands that would diminish or corrupt their genuine nature. This rebellious stage is crucial for breaking free from unconscious conformity, but it's primarily negative, defined by what it rejects rather than what it creates. The final stage is that of the child, which represents the recovery of creative innocence. The child has moved beyond both unconscious conformity and reactive rebellion to achieve genuine creative freedom. They can say, "I will," with the spontaneity and authenticity of someone who is creating fresh possibilities rather than just following or rejecting inherited patterns. This childlike creativity doesn't mean being naive or ignoring the wisdom that comes with experience. Rather, it represents the ability to approach existence with the openness and wonder of someone who hasn't been completely conditioned by predetermined expectations. It's the recovery of our capacity for genuine surprise, authentic curiosity, and creative response to whatever life presents. Think of how a child approaches a tide pool at the beach. They're not burdened by scientific classifications or predetermined ideas about what they should find interesting. They simply look with fresh eyes and respond with natural curiosity to whatever captures their attention. Nietzsche believed that we could learn to approach our entire existence with this kind of fresh attention and creative responsiveness. This childlike creativity becomes particularly important when we consider Nietzsche's understanding of how authentic individuals might relate to suffering and difficulty. Rather than seeing challenges as obstacles to be overcome or avoided, the creative person learns to approach them as raw material for further development and self-understanding. Consider how different artists respond to limitation and constraint. Some see limitations as problems that prevent them from creating what they really want to make. But others discover that limitations can actually enhance creativity by forcing them to find innovative solutions and explore possibilities they might never have considered otherwise. The poet working within the constraints of a sonnet form, the painter working with a limited palette, the musician working within a particular scale, all might discover that boundaries can paradoxically increase rather than decrease their creative freedom. Nietzsche believed that the same principle applies to the limitations and difficulties we encounter in life. Our physical limitations, our emotional patterns, our social circumstances, even our personal failures and disappointments can become sources of creative insight and authentic development if we approach them with the right attitude. This doesn't mean seeking out unnecessary suffering or pretending that painful experiences are pleasant. Rather, it means learning to work creatively with whatever circumstances we encounter, finding ways to transform even difficult experiences into sources of wisdom, strength, or compassion. It's the difference between being a victim of our circumstances and being an artist who uses whatever materials are available to create something meaningful. This artistic approach to difficulty requires what Nietzsche called amor fati, not just as a philosophical concept, but as a lived practice. It means cultivating the ability to find something valuable in every experience, not by denying its challenging aspects, but by discovering how even difficulties can contribute to our overall development and understanding. Imagine someone who loses their job unexpectedly. From one perspective, this is simply a setback, a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. But from the perspective of amor fati, this disruption might also be an opportunity to reassess career goals, to discover hidden strengths, to develop resilience, or to explore possibilities that weren't visible while caught up in routine employment. The external situation is the same, but the relationship to it is completely transformed. This doesn't require pretending to be grateful for difficult experiences while they're happening. That kin backfires, and a forced positivity often prevents us from processing challenges authentically. Instead, amor fati develops gradually as we learn to recognize how past difficulties have contributed to our current wisdom and strength. Over time, this recognition can help us approach new challenges with more curiosity and less resistance. This brings us to one of the most subtle aspects of Nietzschean existentialism. His understanding that authentic existence requires a delicate balance between effort and acceptance, between striving and letting go. On one hand, he emphasized the importance of self-creation, self-overcoming, and the will to power as creative force. We need to take active responsibility for shaping our lives according to our authentic values and vision. But on the other hand, he recognized that excessive striving can become a form of violence against ourselves and others. When we try too hard to force particular outcomes, when we become attached to specific results, when we lose the ability to flow with circumstances as they unfold, we often create unnecessary suffering and miss opportunities that weren't part of our original plan. The most authentic and effective people seem to combine passionate engagement with what Nietzsche called intellectual cleanliness. They care deeply about their projects and relationships, but they're not desperately attached to particular outcomes. They work hard toward their goals, but they remain open to discovering that their goals themselves might need to evolve as they learn and grow. This balance between engagement and detachment becomes particularly important in relationships. Authentic love, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, involves caring deeply about another person while simultaneously respecting their freedom to become themselves. We can offer support, encouragement, and honest feedback, but we cannot and should not try to control another person's development or choices. Nietzsche understood that possessive love, love that tries to keep the beloved from changing or growing, is actually a form of subtle violence. It treats the other person as an object to be owned rather than as a creative being with their own path of development. Authentic love celebrates and supports the beloved's becoming, even when that becoming leads them in unexpected directions. This principle extends to our relationship with ourselves as well. Self-love involves accepting and working with our actual nature, rather than trying to force ourselves into predetermined molds. It means being honest about our genuine strengths and limitations while remaining open to growth and change. It's the difference between narcissistic self-obsession and healthy self-respect. When we love ourselves authentically, we become capable of loving others authentically as well. We no longer need relationships to validate our worth or to complete us in ways we feel incomplete. Instead, we can engage with others from a position of strength and abundance, offering genuine care and support without expecting anything specific in return. This transformation in how we approach relationships reflects a deeper transformation in how we understand human nature itself. Nietzsche rejected the common assumption that human beings are fundamentally selfish creatures who need to be constrained by external moral rules. Instead, he believed that authentically developed individuals naturally express concern for others because their own flourishing is connected to the flourishing of their community. Think of how a healthy ecosystem works. Each species pursues its own survival and reproduction. But in a balanced system, this individual thriving contributes to the health of the whole. The flowering plant that seeks sunlight and nutrients also provides nectar for pollinators and oxygen for other organisms. There's no conflict between self-interest and collective benefit when the system is working properly. Nietzsche believed that human communities could function similarly. When individuals are living authentically, developing their genuine gifts, and expressing their real values, their personal flourishing naturally contributes to collective well-being. The artist who creates from authentic inspiration enriches the cultural life of their community. The parent who raises children from genuine love and wisdom contributes to the next generation's capacity for authentic living. The friend who offers honest support helps others develop their own authenticity. But this natural harmony between individual and collective good only works when people are actually living authentically, rather than just pursuing narrow self-interest or conforming to external expectations. When people are disconnected from their genuine nature, when they're driven primarily by fear, resentment, or the desire for external validation, their actions often create conflict and suffering rather than contributing to collective flourishing. This insight led Nietzsche to one of his most important distinctions between what we might call authentic individualism and narcissistic individualism. Authentic individualism involves developing our unique gifts and perspectives in ways that ultimately serve something larger than our immediate personal gratification. Narcissistic individualism involves pursuing personal advantage without regard for the impact on others or the larger community. The authentic individual might spend years developing their artistic skills, not just for personal satisfaction, but because they believe their creative work can contribute something valuable to human culture. The narcissistic individual might pursue artistic recognition primarily as a way of feeling superior to others or gaining external validation, without much concern for whether their work actually enriches anyone's experience. From the outside, these two approaches might look similar. Both involve individuals pursuing their own development and expression. But the underlying motivation and the long-term consequences are completely different. Authentic individualism tends to create connection, inspiration, and mutual flourishing. Narcissistic individualism tends to create isolation, competition, and mutual diminishment. This brings us to what might be the most practical aspect of Nietzsche's existentialism. His understanding that authentic living requires ongoing attention and cultivation. It's not something we achieve once and then maintain automatically. Instead, it's more like physical fitness or musical skill, something that needs regular practice and attention to maintain and develop. Just as a musician needs to practice regularly to keep their skills sharp and continue developing, we need to regularly examine our choices, reassess our values, and check whether our actions are flowing from our authentic nature or from unconscious patterns and external pressures. This ongoing self-examination isn't narcissistic self-obsession, but rather the kind of attentiveness that any craftsperson brings to their work. A carpenter regularly checks whether their cuts are straight and their joints are tight. A gardener regularly observes how different plants are responding to current conditions and adjusts their care accordingly. Similarly, someone committed to authentic living regularly observes how their choices and actions are affecting their sense of vitality, meaning, and connection with others. This ongoing attention helps us notice when we're drifting away from our authentic path before we get completely lost. We might notice that we're saying yes to commitments that don't reflect our real priorities, or that we're avoiding challenges that could contribute to our growth, or that we're surrounded by people who don't seem to see or appreciate our genuine nature. These observations aren't reasons for harsh self-judgment, but rather information that can help us make course corrections. Just as a sailor uses feedback from wind and current to adjust their heading, we can use feedback from our emotional and physical responses to adjust our life choices in directions that better serve our authentic development. This ongoing attentiveness also helps us recognize and appreciate progress when it occurs. Often we're so focused on where we want to go that we forget to notice how far we've already come. Taking time to acknowledge growth and development that has already occurred can provide encouragement for continuing the sometimes difficult work of authentic living. When we look back and recognize that we're more honest with ourselves than we were 5 years ago, more willing to take creative risks, more capable of genuine intimacy, more able to handle difficulty without losing our center, we gain confidence that continued growth is possible. This isn't self-congratulation, but rather recognition of evidence that the path of authentic development actually works. This recognition of progress becomes particularly important during difficult periods, when growth feels stalled or when external circumstances are challenging. During such times, it can be helpful to remember that authentic development isn't always linear or immediately visible. Sometimes we need to go through periods of apparent stagnation or even temporary regression in order to integrate new insights or prepare for the next stage of growth. Think of how a tree grows. Most of the action happens underground and inside the bark, invisible to casual observation. The visible growth of new branches and leaves represents only a small portion of the total developmental activity. Similarly, much of our authentic development happens internally and may not be immediately apparent to ourselves or others. During winter, a tree might appear dormant or even dead to someone who doesn't understand natural cycles, but beneath the surface, important preparation is happening that will make spring growth possible. Sometimes our periods of apparent stagnation or difficulty serve a similar function, allowing us to consolidate previous growth or prepare for new possibilities that aren't yet visible. This understanding can help us maintain patience and faith during challenging periods rather than abandoning our commitment to authentic living when results aren't immediately apparent. It's another aspect of amor fati, the ability to trust that even seemingly unproductive periods may be serving purposes we don't yet understand. As we draw deeper into Nietzsche's existential landscape, we begin to see how all these elements, self-creation, intellectual honesty, creative response to difficulty, authentic relationships, ongoing attentiveness, work together to create what he envisioned as a new kind of human possibility. Not superhuman in the sense of having powers beyond normal human capacity, but superhuman in the sense of living more fully and authentically than most people imagine possible. This enhanced way of being doesn't require special talents or perfect circumstances. It's available to anyone willing to take responsibility for their own development and to approach existence as a creative project rather than a predetermined script. It's the difference between sleepwalking through life and living with conscious intention and authentic expression. The person who embraces this Nietzschean vision of existence begins to experience what we might call existential artistry. Every day becomes an opportunity to refine and develop their unique approach to being human. They wake up not with a predetermined agenda handed down by others, but with a sense of curiosity about what their authentic self might create through the choices and responses of that particular day. This doesn't mean living without structure or commitment. Rather, it means that their structures and commitments emerge from internal conviction rather than external pressure. When they make promises, it's because they genuinely value reliability and connection. When they work toward goals, it's because those goals reflect their authentic vision of what would make life meaningful and fulfilling. Think of a jazz musician who has mastered their instrument and understands musical theory, but who approaches each performance as an opportunity for creative expression rather than mere repetition of familiar patterns. They have the technical skills and knowledge to play competently, but what makes their music compelling is the unique voice they bring to each moment of improvisation. Nietzsche believed that authentic human existence could function similarly. We can learn from others, study wisdom traditions, develop skills and knowledge. But what makes our lives truly meaningful is the unique way we synthesize and express these influences through our own creative vision and authentic choices. This process of existential artistry requires what Nietzsche called spiritual courage. Not courage in the sense of taking physical risks, but the deeper courage of being willing to think our own thoughts, feel our own feelings, and follow our own path even when it diverges from what others expect or approve of. Most people, Nietzsche observed, spend enormous amounts of energy trying to figure out what others want them to be and then attempting to become that. They mistake external approval for genuine success and external disapproval for failure. But this approach to life inevitably leads to a kind of spiritual exhaustion because we're constantly trying to be someone other than who we actually are. The person developing spiritual courage gradually learns to trust their own inner guidance more than external validation. They begin to ask different questions. Instead of, "What will others think of this choice?" they ask, "Does this choice align with my authentic values and vision?" Instead of, "Will this make me popular?" they ask, "Will this help me become more fully myself?" This shift in focus from external to internal validation can initially feel disorienting or even frightening. When we've been accustomed to using other people's reactions as our primary compass for navigation, learning to trust our own inner sense of direction requires developing new capacities for self-awareness and self-trust. But as this capacity develops, it brings with it a profound sense of relief and freedom. We no longer need to exhaust ourselves trying to please everyone or to maintain personas that don't reflect our genuine nature. We can begin to live from our center rather than from our periphery, making choices that feel integrated and authentic rather than fragmented and reactive. This integration between our inner nature and outer expression creates what Nietzsche saw as genuine personal power. Not power over others, but power to live according to our deepest values and to express our authentic gifts in the world. It's the difference between borrowed power, which depends on external circumstances and other people's approval, and intrinsic power, which emerges from alignment with our genuine nature. When someone is living from this kind of authentic power, their presence tends to be naturally inspiring to others, not because they're trying to impress or influence anyone, but because authenticity itself is attractive. People are naturally drawn to individuals who seem comfortable in their own skin, who express themselves genuinely, who seem to know who they are and what they value. This authentic presence doesn't require perfection or the absence of struggles. In fact, people living authentically often seem more human and relatable than those trying to maintain perfect facades. Their willingness to acknowledge their limitations and uncertainties while still maintaining confidence in their core values and direction creates a kind of inspiring vulnerability. Nietzsche understood that this authentic vulnerability is very different from weakness or neediness. It emerges from strength rather than from deficit. When we are secure in our own worth and clear about our own values, we can afford to be honest about our struggles and limitations. We don't need to pretend to be perfect because our sense of self-worth doesn't depend on others seeing us as flawless. This leads to one of the most beautiful aspects of Nietzschean authenticity, the way it naturally creates space for others to be authentic as well. When we stop performing and start simply being ourselves, we give others permission to do the same. Our willingness to drop pretenses invites others to drop theirs. Our comfort with our own humanity helps others become more comfortable with theirs. In this way, individual authenticity becomes contagious in the best possible sense, not through preaching or teaching, but through simple example. When people encounter someone who is genuinely comfortable being themselves, it reminds them that such comfort is possible. It awakens their own longing for authentic expression and gives them hope that they too could learn to live more genuinely. This ripple effect of authenticity represents one of Nietzsche's most optimistic insights about human potential. He believed that as more individuals learned to live authentically, it would gradually transform the culture as a whole. Communities would become more accepting of diversity, more supportive of individual development, more focused on genuine values rather than superficial appearances. But this cultural transformation doesn't happen through organized movements or political programs. Instead, it emerges naturally as the cumulative effect of individuals choosing authenticity over conformity, creativity over repetition, genuine relationship over social performance. Consider how artistic movements develop and spread. Usually it begins with one or a few artists who start creating in a new way, following their authentic vision rather than established conventions. Their work attracts others who resonate with this fresh approach. Gradually, what started as individual creative rebellion becomes a recognized artistic movement that influences the broader culture. Nietzsche believed that existential authenticity could spread in a similar organic way. As individuals learn to live more genuinely, their example inspires others to explore their own authentic possibilities. Over time, this could lead to cultural shifts toward greater appreciation for individual creativity, diversity of perspective, and genuine human development. This vision of cultural transformation through individual authenticity brings us to Nietzsche's understanding of what he called the eternal return, not as a literal cosmological theory, but as a test for authentic living. He invited us to imagine that we would have to live our exact life over and over again, infinitely, with every detail repeated exactly as it occurred. The question becomes, would we be able to embrace such a fate? Would we love our life enough to want to experience it again and again forever? This thought experiment isn't meant to describe how time actually works, but rather to help us evaluate how fully and authentically we're living. If the idea of eternal recurrence fills us with horror, it might suggest that we're wasting our precious existence on things that don't truly matter to us, that we're living according to other people's values rather than our own, that we're avoiding the risks and vulnerabilities that authentic living requires. But if we can imagine embracing eternal recurrence with joy, it indicates that we're living in alignment with our deepest values, that our choices flow from genuine conviction rather than external pressure, that we're creating the kind of life we would choose again if given the opportunity. This doesn't require a perfect life without difficulties or disappointments. Remember that Nietzsche's own life was marked by illness, professional frustration, and social isolation. But it does require a life where we're engaging authentically with whatever circumstances we encounter, where we're learning and growing from our experiences, where we're expressing our genuine nature rather than hiding behind comfortable masks. The test of eternal recurrence also helps us distinguish between authentic desires and culturally programmed wants. If we imagine having to repeat infinitely a life spent pursuing status symbols that don't genuinely matter to us, or maintaining relationships that require us to suppress important parts of ourselves, or working in careers that feel meaningless, the prospect becomes quite unappealing. But if we imagine repeating a life spent developing our genuine gifts, building authentic relationships, pursuing meaningful work, and expressing our real values, even with all the challenges such a life might include, the prospect becomes much more attractive. This thought experiment can serve as a practical tool for evaluating current choices and future directions. When facing a decision, we might ask ourselves, if I had to repeat this choice and its consequences infinitely, would I make the same decision? This question can help cut through superficial considerations to identify what we genuinely value and what we're willing to take responsibility for. The practice of imagining eternal recurrence also cultivates what Nietzsche called amor fati on a practical level. When we can honestly say that we would choose our life again, including its difficulties and disappointments, we achieve a profound form of existential peace. We're no longer fighting against our circumstances or wishing our story were different. Instead, we can embrace our actual life as the foundation for everything meaningful we've experienced or created. This acceptance doesn't mean passive resignation or the absence of efforts to improve our situation. Rather, it means approaching change from a position of fundamental self-acceptance rather than self-rejection. We work to develop and express our authentic nature more fully, not because there's something wrong with who we currently are, but because growth and creativity are natural expressions of human vitality. When someone reaches this level of existential acceptance and creative engagement, they embody what Nietzsche saw as the highest human possibility, not superiority over others, but the full realization of their own unique potential. They become what he called a free spirit, someone who has liberated themselves from unconscious conformity and reactive rebellion to achieve genuine creative freedom. The free spirit doesn't reject all influences from others, but chooses consciously which influences to embrace and which to set aside. They don't rebel against all authority, but distinguish between authority that serves authentic development and authority that suppresses it. They don't avoid all social involvement, but engage with others in ways that enhance rather than diminish their capacity for genuine expression. This freedom of spirit manifests differently in different individuals because it emerges from authentic self-development rather than conformity to external models. One person might express their free spirit through artistic creation, another through innovative approaches to familiar problems, another through the quality of presence they bring to relationships and daily activities. What unites all genuine free spirits is their commitment to living authentically and their refusal to settle for less than their full potential. They understand that such living requires ongoing effort and attention, that it's a practice rather than an achievement, that it involves constant learning and adaptation rather than fixed final answers. This brings us to one of Nietzsche's most profound insights about human nature. His recognition that we are inherently creative beings, living in a universe that invites creativity. Unlike other animals that seem to have relatively fixed patterns of behavior, human beings have the capacity to consciously create new possibilities, to imagine different ways of being, to transform themselves and their circumstances through conscious choice and creative action. This creative capacity is both a tremendous gift and a significant responsibility. When we recognize that we have the power to shape our own existence, we can no longer blame external circumstances entirely for our dissatisfaction or lack of fulfillment. We become responsible for making something meaningful from whatever materials life provides. But this responsibility, rather than being a burden, can become a source of tremendous joy and vitality when we embrace it fully. The person who understands themselves as a creative being approaches each day with curiosity about what they might discover or create. Even routine activities become opportunities for creative expression and authentic engagement. Think of how differently someone approaches cooking when they see it as creative expression rather than mere necessity. The ingredients become raw materials for artistic creation. The process becomes an opportunity for experimentation and discovery. The result becomes a unique expression of the cook's personality and vision. Nietzsche believed that we could approach our entire existence with this same creative spirit. Work becomes an opportunity to express our unique gifts and contribute something valuable to the world. Relationships become collaborative creative projects where we help each other develop and express our authentic nature. Even difficulties become raw material for creative response and personal development. This creative approach to existence naturally leads to what Nietzsche called the revaluation of all values. When we understand that values are human creations rather than cosmic facts, we become free to examine inherited value systems and to modify or replace those that don't serve authentic human flourishing. This doesn't mean rejecting all traditional values or creating entirely new moral systems from scratch. Some inherited wisdom may serve us well, and some traditional values may align perfectly with authentic human nature. But it does mean taking conscious responsibility for choosing which values to embrace rather than accepting them unconsciously simply because they're familiar. The process of value revaluation requires what Nietzsche called intellectual courage, the willingness to question assumptions that most people take for granted, to think thoughts that might be uncomfortable or unpopular, to follow logic and evidence, even when they lead to conclusions that challenge conventional wisdom. This intellectual courage doesn't mean being contrarian for its own sake, or rejecting ideas simply because they're widely accepted. Rather, it means being willing to examine all ideas, including popular ones, with fresh eyes and honest evaluation. It means distinguishing between ideas that serve authentic human development and those that merely serve social control or psychological comfort. When we approach our own value systems with this kind of honest examination, we often discover that we've been carrying beliefs and assumptions that don't actually reflect our genuine experience or serve our authentic development. We might find that we've been pursuing goals that don't really matter to us, or avoiding activities that could bring genuine fulfillment, or maintaining relationships that require us to suppress important aspects of our nature. This discovery can initially be unsettling because it requires us to take responsibility for making changes rather than simply following familiar patterns. But it also opens up possibilities for more authentic and fulfilling ways of living that we might never have imagined while caught up in unconscious conformity. The person who is engaged in this kind of honest self-examination and value revaluation naturally develops what Nietzsche called nobility of spirit. Not nobility in the sense of social class or inherited privilege, but nobility in the sense of living according to high standards that emerge from authentic self-understanding rather than external pressure. This spiritual nobility manifests as a kind of inner dignity that doesn't depend on external circumstances or other people's recognition. It emerges from the knowledge that we're living according to our genuine values, that we're developing our authentic gifts, that we're contributing something meaningful to the world, even if that contribution isn't widely recognized or rewarded. Think of an artist who continues to create beautiful work even when it's not commercially successful. A teacher who gives their best effort even when students don't seem to appreciate it. A parent who loves their children authentically even when that love isn't returned in the ways they might hope for. This is nobility of spirit in action, the ability to maintain high standards and authentic engagement, regardless of external rewards or recognition. This inner nobility naturally expresses itself in how we treat others as well. When we're living from our own authentic center, we're less likely to need to diminish others to feel good about ourselves. We can appreciate other people's authentic development even when it's different from our own. We can offer genuine support and encouragement without needing to control or manipulate. As our exploration of Nietzschean existentialism draws toward its conclusion, we begin to see how all these elements, authenticity, creativity, intellectual courage, spiritual nobility, work together to create a comprehensive approach to human existence. It's not a system that provides easy answers or guarantees specific outcomes, but rather a framework for living that honors both individual uniqueness and our shared humanity. This framework acknowledges that existence is challenging and often uncertain, but it also reveals possibilities for meaning, growth, and fulfillment that remain available even in difficult circumstances. It suggests that we have more freedom and creative power than we often realize, but it also emphasizes that this freedom comes with the responsibility to use it wisely and authentically. Perhaps most importantly, Nietzsche's existentialism offers a vision of human life that is neither naively optimistic nor pessimistically resigned. It recognizes both the difficulties and the possibilities inherent in human existence, and it provides tools for engaging creatively and authentically with whatever circumstances we encounter. And so, as we reach the gentle end of our journey through Nietzsche's existential landscape, perhaps the most beautiful realization is this: you don't need to become someone extraordinary to live extraordinarily. You simply need to become who you truly are. In a world that often feels predetermined and constraining, Nietzsche whispers to us across the centuries that we are the authors of our own existence, the artists of our own becoming. Whether you embrace eternal recurrence or find your own path to authentic living, remember that every choice, every moment of courage to be yourself, every decision to create rather than merely consume, adds another brushstroke to the masterpiece of your life. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow offers another blank canvas, another opportunity to say yes to existence, another chance to become. Sweet dreams, fellow creators of meaning.